the LBF Church podcast, where we talk about topics that help us grow in our affection towards Jesus and also grow more equipped to follow him in the ways he's leading us. So I'm Dan Franklin. Here's my buddy Daniel Dukes.
Hello. Thanks.
Team Dan for this podcast, bringing to you. So we're going to talk about a topic that I hesitated on because I felt like it might be a little tricky, but I think that we can have a helpful conversation. And specifically what we're going to talk about is how the Trump presidency has had an impact on the church. So just to clarify, our goal is not to walk through everything that's happened in the presidency and evaluate it from our political opinions, as much as saying, all right, we're members of the body of Jesus Christ, and we're trying to figure out how does this political situation impact us and what can we do about it. So I know just in starting off, you were somebody that I wanted to do this conversation with, just because we've got to have some conversations about this, and also because as a millennial,
yeah, thank you. As a millennial,
you're going to speak for all millennials.
My enlightened opinion will grace you.
So starting off, obviously, because I asked you to do this conversation, I think that this is a worthwhile conversation. But I want to bounce back to you. Some people might say that that's not a topic worth covering.
Yeah.
Why, to you, is this a conversation that's worth us having as members of the body of Christ?
Right. Well, I thought about this when you sent the question over to me a couple weeks ago, and really the main reason I think I've decided like it's worth talking about is because everyone else is talking about it. And if for no other reason than that, the church should be in the conversations of the rest of the world. It's kind of awkward for us to say like, yeah, we're going to choose to just, stay silent on a couple of these things, because ultimately that means we're not, actually in culture, putting out an opinion, putting out a place at least, because people are looking to the church now, especially saying,
Sure.
How do you feel about these statements and that? How do you feel about this action, this kind of a thing? So yeah, I think it's worth having, because if we don't, say something or, point people in a direction, it can kind of be left open-ended, which is probably worse.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes where we end up having people speak sort of on behalf of the church that we don't necessarily think. We're like, we don't want that person as our spokesperson.
Yeah.
But one of the things, I know this, you're a little bit younger than me, but for the last couple decades especially, there's been this whole idea of the evangelical vote, and that being a major factor in politics. And so even that has, whether it's begrudgingly or willingly, has kind of brought us into the political fray to say, all right, well, now we're a part of the political discussion because talk show hosts and politicians are talking about evangelicals and the evangelical vote. So that brings up a little bit of us saying, well, now we're being talked about as a block. And so because of that, there's an issue of giving some voice to that and evaluating that.
Yeah, I hate the block. I hate, they're useful. I think that sometimes they are useful, like statistically, to an extent. But I really hate it when whenever anyone describes you people, obviously it's gonna be terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no like real full win there, although I think it is useful. So yeah, ultimately, because like I read a news article, it feels like every week white evangelicals feel this way, and someone's like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
So
I'm one of them.
I was like, hey, stop saying that about me.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I think it's worth, at least saying like, no, at least, no, not from me, or yes from me, in a certain thing. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting. We were just talking about this, but we're, over a year into the Trump presidency, about a year and a half from the time that he was elected. And so there's at least a little bit of an ability for us not just to look back on the election process, but sort of what life is like, at least under the Trump presidency, whether it's going to be for a few more years, whether there's a second term. Mm-hmm. We can at least look at it and say, what has been the impact of this? And I'll just say, we'll go back and I'll ask your take on this. But when the election was happening, I found myself deeply concerned. And my biggest concern wasn't Donald Trump might get elected. In fact, it was funny, a friend the day after the election, because I'd said some critical things of Trump on social media, you sort of said like, well, are you sad? I was like, am I sad? I was left with such bad alternatives. I'm like, I'm not sad about, like, it was sort of like, yes, I'm sad. I'm not especially sad.
Yeah.
I'm just sad of whatever was going to happen. But for me, the deepest concern, the reason I decided originally to kind of speak out about some things was not because I was saying this man might get elected. It was because I was saying this man might get elected on the backs of evangelicals, and that could be detrimental to the church's witness, not simply to what might happen to our country, but what might happen to the church's witness as we find ourselves aligned willingly or hesitantly with somebody that arguably has some significant problems.
Yeah, I mean, I remember talking to this, back then even, and it was this feeling of like, if you attach yourself wholeheartedly to someone's actions before you've even known that what they're going to make, that's pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
I had this professor in college who, I remember someone asked her like, hey, how do you feel about the economic policies right now? And she answered by saying, whatever Obama does, I think is going to be the best choice here. And I remember thinking like, man, logically, I don't like that.
Yeah.
It feels like you could do, we could reach a better point of saying like, yeah, I'm going to take it as it comes, each one, each policy. And man, it felt like back, a year and a half ago when President Trump was elected, man, it did feel like it was on the backs of evangelicals.
Yeah.
And I felt like, I hate when we say like, yeah, we took this president to victory, because that means that, hey, we took everything he does now.
On the hook.
Yeah, I honestly think, whether I like it or not, we are on the hook.
Yeah.
In a way. Hopefully I'm not, but we still are.
But, and that is, even what you just said right there, kind of like the I'm not, but we are, I think it's one of those things that there's a level of humility we've got to have as any kind of people, but as evangelicals, to say, okay, that there can be the temptation, which I think can be arrogant on our part, to sort of, as individuals, to say, well, I didn't, they might, but I didn't. And instead to say, all right, we as a group, this is our reality.
Mm-hmm.
So I could say, hey, I spoke out, I didn't vote, but to say, all right, this is our reality, at least in the minds of people. And that kind of leads into the question, all right, we don't want to speak, just as we don't want to speak of evangelicals as a monolith, we also don't want to say, well, what do non-Christians think of us? Because obviously there's a massive variety there. But from your perspective, what have been some things that you've seen as far as how the Trump presidency and the perceived and real evangelical involvement in him getting to be president has impacted people's view, outsiders' view of the Church of Jesus Christ?
Poorly. Honestly, I guess from like my perspective of, the stuff I'm taking in, it really feels like the reputation is hurt. And that's really sad. Really, I mean, in an ideal world, I just could see us getting way more excited about the message of Jesus and what he's doing than like the politics of the day, because it feels like people are so passionate about, oh man, this is happening and I'm going to talk about this with everyone around me, but rather than talking about the life change that Jesus brings. And I feel like we wouldn't be having this issue if we could come to, what makes us Christians is us focusing on really what Jesus is doing in our lives. I see so many political bursts from people all the time. And it's kind of settled down now, it feels like.
Yeah.
Maybe in the last 6 months, it's kind of like taken a little bit of a back seat. But I'm just thinking, man, if we were as passionate talking about the latest policy as we were about Jesus, this reputation issue would be, unfounded.
Yeah.
And it would be dismissible much quicker. As of right now, it's like, man, it takes a lot of steps to actually disprove, it seems like, what's being projected. And so there's sort of this... there's a process now that comes along with this bad reputation, it feels like, of now taking steps to try and disprove it as it comes.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think it is an interesting thing, because you think, I would think for somebody, if I was talking to a non-Christian, about sort of, and they were saying, why is it that, so many evangelicals voted for Donald Trump? If I believed it was accurate to say, here's basically what happened. We ended up in an election where there were two historically unpopular candidates. That's just a fact. And because of a couple of reasons, because of Supreme Court and because of abortion and some religious freedom things, a lot of evangelicals just begrudgingly said, well, I'm going to vote for this person. For me, I'd say, well, that seems like a reasonable thing that while somebody might disagree with, they could say, all right, I get that. That's not a significant compromise. Whereas sort of, as you're saying, the loudness or the passion behind it, or for me, the biggest concern was always the idea of saying, what is it that we are going to sort of explain away or justify? And again, I know at least mostly or completely before your time, but I remember what happened when Bill Clinton was in office.
Definitely before my time.
Yeah, definitely before your time as a millennial.
I was alive, but
okay.
Not thinking.
That's good to know. But just that there was a sense of indignation. This man is, from many, many loud evangelical voices saying this man is not qualified to be president. This, character counts and morality counts, and how can he do these things?
Yeah.
And, as a young man at the time, kind of a high schooler and a college student, that for me formed a little bit of all right, this makes sense. And I, as an adult, I don't know what I would think of all that, but at least the idea of, hey, this makes sense, that we believe that it's not just the idea of, policies alone. It's the idea of the character behind the person. And so then just to see for many people a real direct 180 on that, it's hard not to see hypocrisy there.
Yeah.
And for me, and this is a part when we get into the Bible and talk about idolatry and just the idea of idolatry, to say, amongst other, there's lots of great kind of pithy definitions of an idol, but an idol is something you're willing to sacrifice for. And so just the whole idea of saying, all right, and I don't think that the idea was that there was an idolization of Donald Trump or currently of President Trump, but there might have been the idolization of religious freedom or political power, and therefore saying, I'm willing to do this if it gets me that. So it's sort of like I'm willing to sacrifice, speaking about these things, speaking about, Donald Trump's infidelity, or speaking about just really, indefensible comments at different times. For me, it's always been funny because there's been kind of the constant bickering about, was this comment racist or was this, and I'm like, all right, here's the deal. A comment doesn't have to be racist to be bad. There are a whole lot of bad comments that, whether they're racist or not, are just bad comments, just horrible things to say about people. So when we as evangelicals say, it's not that bad, or didn't really mean it, or he's really a good guy, or when you have Jerry Falwell Jr. standing with the thumbs up in front of the Playboy poster in the background, that's when I'm like, well, now we just look silly. Like now we're just going to reap the charges of hypocrisy, and they're not going to be ridiculous charges. They're going to be
real.
Yeah, legitimate charges against us.
Yeah, I mean, this is like I said, it's terrible terrible to be in that block.
It's not terribly encouraging so far, but we're going to make a twist. We're going to make a turn. So we're going to talk about this because, at least for me, I think that there are some unique opportunities that this affords, or even some positive things that have come and could come from this. And so that's the whole idea that we want to talk about now, to say, all right, there are some very real things. My opinion would be it was a negative experience for the church, being viewed as, and being viewed at least somewhat rightly as being saying, hey, this is our guy. We're going to kind of downplay the obvious flaws, and we're going to align ourselves with them. But to say, all right, now we're in this situation. We can't go back and change the past. What are some positive things that either have come or you think could come from the current political climate we find ourselves in? Yeah,
I think, for one thing, it feels like we're forced to give answers for the first time in a while. At least under President Obama, it's so much easier for, just considering on how evangelicals voted.
Right.
It's so much easier to just be like, man, if we had our president up there, we'd be doing all this other stuff. And then now it's well, okay, now that you have to almost either defend your choice or say this is bad, this is good, trying to make your point. So what I actually love about it is it's forced a lot of us to try to call out, where things are and take a stance sometimes when we need to. And so it feels like it's forced it on us because now everyone's like, what do you think about this?
Right.
Hey, he said this thing. Can you answer to that? And I mean, that's like a challenge I kind of liked accepting, because now it's like, okay, how much more prepared can I be thinking, okay, people are going to be asking me either on like a actual asking me, or I feel like I need to give an opinion just so that I know on my own, I want to know what I believe and why I believe it. And so it's forced me to actually take a stance where it feels like, 8 years previous, it wasn't as necessary.
Yeah,
it was
there was nobody. Yeah, there was nobody saying to evangelicals, "This is your guy. You need to answer for him." With President Obama, exactly. Like you said, just because of how the voting played out. Whereas with President Trump, they could
now
say,
it's a daily experience.
This is your guy.
Exactly. Yeah, it seems like it's literally daily, or weekly now.
Well, it is. And what you said about the whole calling out idea, to me, that's right at the core of what I think is part of our calling as Christians. And I know you're not as into sports as me.
No.
But so this last year the Dodgers were in the World Series, and it was like the most miserable World Series for me in years because it was the first time in like 30 years that I cared deeply about what happened. Other World Series I would watch and I would be able to be very objective, just like, hey, that guy is better than that guy.
Yeah.
That guy did something, that was a bad call by the umps. This year, it was not the case. I was so invested that I couldn't be objective. I didn't even enjoy it. If they would have won, I would have enjoyed it retrospect. I couldn't handle it. And I think that what tends to happen in the political situations is we kind of choose our teams, and then we say, but I've got to, he's my guy, or the Republicans are my team, and so I've got to explain, or I've got to at least say the Democrats are worse, and so because of that, I've got to find a way to make sure that I'm right. Just like I have friends that are fans of other teams that years ago the Lakers beat, and they come to me with reasons why the Lakers really shouldn't have won if these 12 things would have just gone differently. And it's like, all right, when you're that invested, you can't be objective. And so for us, I think we have the freedom because of what Jesus has done for us to say, our kingdom is not of this world.
Yeah.
We're not withdrawing from the culture. I don't think it's wrong to be a registered Republican, registered Democrat, any of that. That's fine. But for us to say, we should maintain the freedom to say, this thing was bad, this thing was good. This thing was bad, this thing was good. And in fact, because as we talk about it on our side, there can be the tendency for some people in the Republican circles to sort of like, we're going to try to make it look good even though it was bad.
Yeah.
There's people I see on the other side that I think like, I can't believe you're somehow making this thing that the president did bad. Like, it's hard to imagine anybody seeing it as bad. But it is that whole, hey, we've chosen our sides. And so like you were saying with the gal in your class, sort of like, well, if he's my guy, I'm just going to assume that it's good. It's good. It's good because it's Trump, or it's bad because it's Trump. Instead of saying, like I had a friend who really thought that I shouldn't have spoken out against Trump in the primaries.
Yeah.
And shortly after President Trump came into office, there was something about defunding Planned Parenthood, which I'm in favor of. And he sent me a message on social media and said, what do you think now? I was sort of like, I think it's great. Yeah. That was all I said. And then he said, do you wish you voted for him? I said, no, but I think it's great. Like what, it shouldn't be an all or nothing thing with us. We have that freedom.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, that's to me is my mindset it's almost like, okay, we're past the election. Yeah. Let's stop thinking about who voted for who and who made what choice then, because it really was like a lose-lose in so many ways. And that's like a common term that I think will be in history books described of this election.
It's not just two guys' opinion. I mean, really, the historic unfavorables on both the candidates.
Right, okay.
It was really significant.
Really bad.
Like, it was historic.
And you could feel it in the air.
Yeah.
There was not a lot of
when even voter turnout is down because people even voting are like, well, fine. Okay. I got to vote for somebody.
Probably a lot of historic third-party candidates too stepping up, or at least a multitude of side ones. But yeah, it feels like once we can get past the I'm taking credit for everything this guy's doing, or don't you wish you voted for him or didn't vote for him? Once we get past that, it really opens us all up, I feel like, to leave our camps and leave our tribes behind. That either we've been put into or we've snuck into ourselves, but leave it behind and then say, like you said, from the sidelines or even from the middle, to be able to say good, bad, good. Right. You know what I mean? Because God's given us discernment to be able to tell these things, and us calling them out is not a bad thing. I think it's totally appropriate for us to say that is a good thing, and then say, he shouldn't have tweeted that at the same time.
That is almost always the answer.
And that is the one to use every day.
Well, yeah, and that does. And to me, I think that's significant because even, there might be some people watching or listening to this that are saying, well, I don't really engage on the political stuff, which is okay. But I think what we're talking about here is something that's transferable to other situations, that there can be people in our lives or even other public figures that we view as just sort of, they're all good or all bad. Instead of saying, all right, this thing over here, like there are different authors. I just finished a book by Dallas Willard that overall I say was really, really good. There were a couple things in it that I thought were pretty bad. Him saying basically that God doesn't know everything because he chooses not to know everything. I thought that was really bad.
Wrong.
Most of the other stuff he said I thought was really good. And so just to get into the habit with the authors we read, with the friends we have, to say, you may have a friend that's a really good friend that occasionally says stuff that you just got to say, Now that part was wrong. I'm not going to take their advice on that, or I'm going to call them out on that instead of just assuming, well, this guy's on my side, so he's good. She's against me, so I'm never going to listen to her. It's not a helpful way to conduct ourselves in life.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. That's actually been like, I think a benefit to me personally after the election was, and I talked to you about this too, maybe 9 months ago or so, but I remember saying like, this has made me say, I need to know my Bible.
Sure.
Because it's like, I find that the more I'm in that world, the more I'm reading the Bible, the more I am listening to pastors, deciding on my own like theology of what I believe, the more I've worked that out, the easier it is to say, this is right, this is wrong. Although that sometimes is like, a messy line, it's so much easier for my sensors are tuned. It feels like I'm way more able to discern easier. And ultimately, it feels like the more my mind is on Jesus and the Bible, the less those things even affect me. It's like I can still make a choice on them, but it's like I'm like ultimately the control is so much somewhere else that it's easier for my mind to be at ease. Because politics can get way too stressful if you get into it too much.
When you think of the idea, if we have an unshakable kingdom, and we have a kingdom that is going to last. There's the whole book of Daniel, especially the first 7 chapters, are all about God showing Daniel there's going to be a kingdom, and then an even stronger kingdom, and then an even stronger kingdom, and then an even stronger kingdom. And guess what all of them have in common?
They all fall.
They all will fall. But the kingdom of God will never fall. Right. So we have an unshakable kingdom, and that gives us the liberty of not being overly troubled, of calling things that are evil, evil. There's a passage in, I think it's in Isaiah 5, where God is speaking of Israel, and it says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. So it doesn't mean that we say, who cares what happens?
Yeah.
But it does mean that we say a Trump presidency, a Clinton presidency, an Obama presidency, a Bush presidency, these things do not shake our ultimate hope. We're able to live in that, and it might be unrealistic. Part of my hope is that coming to this will be an opportunity for Christians to say, all right, we recognize now we kind of did something wrong. We recognize now that we tied ourselves to somebody that we had no business tying ourselves to. So now we're going to pull back, and we're going to look to be what we're called to be, the prophetic witness to the culture. The truth speakers to the Democrats, to the Republicans. The whole idea with the prophet, and I believe that that's a description of the church. The church's calling is to be a prophetic witness to the culture. With a prophet, no one was safe. The king wasn't safe.
Right.
The priests weren't safe. The poor weren't safe. The rich weren't. No one was safe from the truth. So we can be gracious about it, but it's like, why would a Republican be safe from the truth, or a Democrat be safe from, or a conservative, or even a Christian in government be safe from the truth? We want to be people who are saying what's true and holding up the gospel of Jesus to the world, and saying this affects how we vote and this affects our politics, but those things are ancillary. Those things are, I'm a Christian who happens to be a Democrat, or a Christian who happens to be a Republican, rather than, well, I'm a Republican because I'm a Christian, or
right.
or these things are intrinsically tied.
Yeah, I love that, because it simplifies and puts me at ease, when I think on those kinds of things, because ultimately putting my faith in God means, worries on these kind of things, they're actually, mitigated in a lot of ways. And now there's a time for action and things like that. In history, we've totally seen people. Bonhoeffer was one, right?
Absolutely.
I think people overreact a lot, in America right now. But yeah, with that said, it really feels like the more my mind is on God, the easier all this gets.
Yeah.
The decisions at least, and the right and the wrong, and some, hey, he's convicted me on things, where it's like, whoa, that's so cool. And so if we want other people to change their minds to what's right, let's start praying for him. I like that. I like that idea.
That's good. And the other thing is just, sometimes I think we can get on just a meta scale with this, thinking in monoliths. What is the evangelical voice to the non-Christian world? Instead of saying, all right, we've got a whole bunch of evangelicals, we got a whole bunch of non-Christians, we got a whole bunch of people in this world. And to say most people's minds are changed in one-on-one conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So say there are people in our lives, and like you're saying, there are going to be people that are going to say, all right, so you're a Christian, what do you think about this whole thing? Or did you vote? Or what, to ask those questions. And to say those are unique opportunities that like you'd mentioned before, may not have come up in another presidency. That in this, at the very least, that those can be opportunities for us to point people back to, this is the core of our belief. The core of our belief is about Jesus, what he's done. He is the one true king. This affects how we handle these things. These may be some reasons why the evangelical vote fell this way, but to talk about it in terms of those individual conversations instead of thinking, well, I'm going to, just give a quick post or give a quick tweet and that'll, kind of solve the issue. So many times on social media, I want to ask, who are you even talking to? I said this thing, I'm not sure who is the audience.
Yeah,
so,
at this point, probably been unfollowed by the people who
right,
disagree.
Well, there's that too. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you to those of you who watched or listened to this. Hopefully what you saw is two guys who love Jesus, who are looking to process through the times we've been placed in and how we respond to it in a way that really reflects the kingdom of God. And if you have thoughts or comments or feedback or disagreements, feel free to leave those comments on the site. You can watch this and other podcast episodes at lbf.church. Just click on the blog and podcast button and go on over to it. You can also download on iTunes, which we'd really appreciate because we're just looking to get the word out and good content like this to people so that we can engage in topics that help us grow more affectionate towards Jesus and more equipped to follow him. So, Daniel,
thanks, Dan.
Thanks so much for doing this. Enjoyed doing this together. Until next time, this is Dan and Daniel.
Team Dan.
Team Dan for the LBF Church Podcast.